The ocean stretched infinitely beneath us, a black and silver canvas, trembling under the moonlight. Waves slapped the hull of our vessel with a rhythm that should have been soothing, but tonight it sounded like the ticking of a clock counting down the moments of my life. I was Maeve, acclaimed marine cartographer and founder of Oceanus Ventures. I had spent years building a reputation on knowledge, precision, and a love of the sea. But Darius, my husband, my supposed partner, my betrayer, had only ever played the role of financier and charming frontman. Tonight, he would play a far darker role. I held the final cup of tea in my hand, savoring the comforting warmth that now carried a bitter undertone I couldn't place, until the first tingling of paralysis crept up my fingers. The sensation was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but my trained mind recognized it instantly. The agent had been slipped in without hesitation, carefully calculated to leave no trace until too late. I turned slowly to Darius. His figure was bathed in the harsh deck light, revealing a face I thought I knew intimately. Tanned, sharp-featured, handsome, but now alien, transformed by calculation and cold detachment. "The accident report will be precise, Maeve," he said, voice low, calm, almost tender in its cruelty. "Sudden equipment failure during a remote survey. Nobody will find your body. Just drifting wreckage. Oceanus and everything you've built will revert to me immediately." I stared at him, my mind racing through every betrayal we had endured together. The stolen credit, the carefully curated public appearances, the way he had subtly undermined my authority at every meeting while letting me carry the intellectual burden. His resentment wasn't about money. It wasn't just about power. It was about the brilliance I had, the vision I embodied, the world I controlled with precision he could never match. A salty breeze mixed with a metallic tang of fear in my mouth. My breath hitched. My body stiffened as the agent climbed my spine. And yet, amidst the growing paralysis, a single, defiant thought ignited in my mind. I would survive. I would return. And when I did, Darius would not merely fail. He would crumble, publicly, utterly, and finally understand the cost of his hubris. I tried to reach for him, to scream, to warn him that he could not predict me, even in this moment. My lips moved, but the words became gurgled, meaningless. My hands fell to the deck, my nails scraping the cold metal. The moonlight reflected off the water like broken glass, and I imagined it shattering around me, fragments of my life, my trust, my future, all floating away. And then came the quiet, the kind that follows inevitability. My mind, still racing, cataloged everything I had lost and everything I would reclaim. Every financial misstep Darius would make in the future. Every underestimation of my intelligence. Every unethical shortcut he would attempt. I filed it away, a mental blueprint for vengeance and reclamation. Even as darkness edged in, I smiled faintly to myself, a ghost of determination. My final thought was a vow, not whispered but engraved in the depths of my soul. If given another chance, I would not merely survive. I would dominate, unassailable, and rebuild my world according to my rules. No lies, no compromises, no one else's shadow over my brilliance. The sea, indifferent and eternal, whispered against the hull. Waves that had once been my refuge now became my adversary. And yet, in that profound isolation, I felt a spark of something stronger, a promise that death, in this life or the next, would never be the end of Maeve. The world returned to me in fragments of sound and scent, the hiss of an espresso machine, the salty tang of the nearby harbor, the clatter of cups and cutlery in a busy cafe. My eyes opened to sunlight streaming through a narrow window, painting the walls in warm gold. I was Maeve, but not the Maeve who had nearly died in the Pacific. This Maeve was younger, fitter, sharper, and armed with knowledge no one else possessed. July 5th, 2003. I checked the date on the newspaper. My heart skipped a beat. I had been returned before Darius, before the first voyage that would cement my submission to him, before the first investment that would tie me to his orbit. I was 22, and the world was mine to reshape. The memory of the freezing ocean haunted me, and I shivered despite the warmth of the sun. Darius's shadow loomed large in my mind. The calm cruelty, the meticulous calculation, the betrayal that had nearly ended me. I replayed every detail, catalogued every reaction, every plan he had set in motion in my previous life. Now, armed with foresight, I had a chance to rewrite everything. I rose from the cafe chair, my body moving with the ease of youth and strength. My mind, honed over years of survival and strategy, ran through a mental checklist. Darius, my own future, potential allies, weak points in his character. Even then, I knew brute force was not the answer. Subtlety, precision, and timing would be my weapons. Darius, as expected, was exactly where he should be. A fast-talking, charming financial consultant, scraping together small contracts, gaining trust, but not yet powerful enough to dominate. He had no idea of the storm coming, no awareness that I now held every piece of the puzzle. The first step was to reposition myself. My prior career had focused on deep-sea exploration, high-profile surveys, and ventures that had always captured Darius's attention and, later, his envy. I had to abandon that path. I needed a field he would consider trivial, unworthy, and uninteresting, but one I could dominate with knowledge and foresight: coastal conservation logistics. I spent the next hours immersed in local records, ecological reports, and logistical data. Every shoreline, port, and protected area became a potential lever. I began to see the patterns of human and environmental activity as a living map, one I could manipulate for maximum effect. I plotted Darius's likely future investments, identifying weak points I could exploit without ever revealing myself. But the challenge was not only external. I had to confront the echoes of trauma from my near death. Every small breeze that reminded me of the ocean, every wave, every scent of salt and brine, sent shivers down my spine. I realized that I could not simply act as a strategist. I needed to recalibrate my mind and body, channeling fear into focus. Each step forward was a reclaiming of agency, a reminder that the ocean, which had once threatened to claim me, could now serve as my canvas for strategy. And then there was Callan. My past life had framed him as my adversary, fierce, uncompromising, relentless in defending the coast against corporate exploitation. In this life, he would become my ally. The thought made my pulse quicken. Turning a former enemy into a partner required precision, persuasion, and absolute clarity of purpose. I knew that Callan's principles would be the counterbalance to my foresight, creating a synergy that even Darius could not anticipate. By the afternoon, I had a rough blueprint. Step 1. Establish credibility in coastal conservation. Step 2. Secure small victories that could be scaled into influence. Step 3. Subtly block Darius's early financial pathways by dominating sectors he would later require. Step 4. Convert Callan from adversary to ally, building a partnership based on ethics, intellect, and trust. Step 5. Wait for the perfect moment to dismantle Darius's future empire, piece by piece. I walked along the pier, letting the wind whip through my hair, scanning the horizon. The ocean, which had almost been my tomb, now felt like a tool, a living map to be read, understood, and manipulated. Each wave whispered secrets I had once ignored. Each current offered guidance. I could almost see the patterns of commerce and corruption in the water itself, flowing from port to city, from investor to developer, all leading to the man who had once betrayed me. At a small local environmental office, I introduced myself to contacts, began gathering preliminary data, and quietly assessed the movers and shakers in the community. Every conversation, every email, every report was an opportunity. I operated like a ghost, invisible but omnipresent. I filed away details about Darius's likely collaborators, noting the patterns of his charm, his shortcuts, and his arrogance. By nightfall, I had returned to a small rented room overlooking the coastline. I spread maps and documents across the desk, outlining the first steps of what would become tides and truth. I paused, staring out at the dark water. The memory of Darius's betrayal surged through me, but I welcomed it now. It was fuel, not fear. I traced the line of the horizon with my finger, imagining the networks of influence and money that would later be his undoing. I whispered into the night, a vow that would anchor me for years. I will survive. I will rebuild. I will be the master of my own fate. And Darius, he will learn the cost of underestimating Maeve. The wind carried my words across the waves, and for the first time, I felt a strange serenity. The ocean was vast, indifferent, and eternal, but so was my resolve. My second life had begun, and I would navigate it with precision, intelligence, and absolute purpose. The first time I saw Callan again, I felt a jolt I hadn't expected. The local council meeting hall was packed, air thick with tension and the smell of paper, coffee, and too much hot air. He was standing at the podium, fiery and unyielding, challenging a developer's plan to build on a protected stretch of coast. I had seen this in my first life, his relentless passion, the moral rigor, the way he forced compromises that many corporate players tried to ignore. He was intense, eyes like flint, and every word cut through the room with purpose. It annoyed me then, but now, with knowledge of what Darius would do, I saw him differently. He was a force to be harnessed if carefully approached. After the meeting, I waited, letting the crowd thin, letting his attention remain on the departing developers and their advisors. When he finally turned to leave, I approached him with calm confidence. "Mr. Reese," I said, keeping my tone neutral but firm. "I have data showing that the environmental impact of this development is far higher than the developers admit. And I can show financial projections that reveal serious inconsistencies in their plan." He stopped, studying me cautiously. His eyebrows knitted. "And you are?" "I am Maeve," I replied. "I work in logistics and conservation. I want to protect these areas, not exploit them. Your passion, my skills. I think together we can prevent this project from causing irreversible damage." He tilted his head, suspicion clear in his expression. "You're not another corporate wolf in sheep's clothing?" I smiled faintly, sensing the hesitation. "I am not. I am driven by principle. Everything I do is transparent, accountable, verifiable. I want to build a system that protects the coast, not one that profits from its destruction." His eyes narrowed, searching mine, measuring whether my words were empty or intentional. Then he gestured toward the small wooden bench near the hall's side entrance. "Walk with me," he said. As we moved along the boardwalk, I began presenting my preliminary data, maps, spreadsheets, environmental impact projections, all carefully compiled, precise and undeniable. Every word was deliberate, designed to earn his trust without revealing the full depth of my foresight. Callan listened, occasionally interjecting questions that revealed his sharp analytical mind and unwavering commitment to ethics. He pushed, pressed, tested my knowledge, and I matched him, presenting the evidence calmly, logically, with no trace of ego or manipulation. "You understand the gravity of this," he finally said, his voice measured but firm. "Many people claim to want to protect the coast, but few actually understand how to navigate the legal, financial, and political complexities involved." "I do," I said. "And I know what's at stake, not just for this project, but for future developments. Darius Valencia would see this coast sacrificed if it benefited him financially. But I can prevent it, and you can help me." He regarded me, evaluating not just the data, but the person behind it. I held his gaze unwavering. "I don't make alliances lightly," he admitted. "But you've shown competence, clarity, and purpose. I am willing to give this a chance, conditionally. We work together, we protect the coast, and we expose corruption where it exists. That is the agreement." I nodded, relief mingling with resolve. The conditional partnership was all I needed. From this point on, Callan would be my mirror, my balance, my ethical anchor. I would feed him precision, data, and foresight. He would provide the moral compass, the legal acumen, the principled push I had lacked in my first life. Over the next weeks, our collaboration deepened. We met in offices, cafes, and on-site visits to threatened areas. I observed him constantly, not as a romantic interest, but as a professional force whose principles were unshakable. Every discussion, every negotiation, every counter-strategy strengthened the framework I was building. Darius, unaware of my return and my plans, began his slow march toward the deals that would eventually ruin him. Every move he made was predictable, a series of patterns I cataloged meticulously. Callan became my conduit for executing interventions, legal objections, strategic alliances, public advocacy, all while I remained technically anonymous in the background. Yet even as we worked, I was cautious with Callan. I could not reveal the trauma, the near-death experience, the knowledge of Darius's future actions. Instead, I framed my foresight as deep intuition, obsessive attention to detail, and relentless analysis. Callan accepted it at face value, his respect for my mind growing steadily. The partnership was exhilarating in its intensity. Our goals aligned perfectly, yet I was constantly aware of the emotional undercurrents, the lingering fear of betrayal, the scars of my first life, the unspoken tension of trust tested at every step. I had learned that alliances, even with the right people, required vigilance. By the end of the month, we had successfully blocked the first phase of Darius's coastal development project. Small victories, but meaningful. They demonstrated our combined capacity to foresee, anticipate, and neutralize unethical actions. For the first time in my life, I felt the exhilaration of control, not over Darius, but over the course of my own destiny. Callan's cautious but firm approach complemented my assertive strategy. I began to see the potential of a long-term collaboration, my insight, his principles, a network of allies, and a plan that extended far beyond this single battle. In this new life, the enemy I had once known, the man who nearly destroyed me, would find himself opposed by a force he could neither anticipate nor comprehend. And I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the true power of this alliance was only beginning to emerge. The coast, the projects, the battle against corruption, it was all a stage. And I was no longer merely surviving. I was building a legacy, step by precise step. The wind carried a faint tang of salt and seaweed as I walked along the edge of the small harbor, my thoughts weaving like the currents below. Each tidal rhythm reminded me of the betrayal I had survived, the ocean that had almost claimed me, and the man who had tried to extinguish my life. Darius Valencia's name haunted my strategies like a shadow I could never ignore, but now, the shadow was something I could anticipate, calculate, and ultimately counter. Callan had become more than an ally. He was the ethical compass to my precise, sometimes ruthless mind. In our work, he questioned every assumption, forced me to justify every tactic, and demanded integrity even when shortcuts seemed tempting. There was a quiet strength in him that steadied the chaos in my own thoughts. I admired it without letting it soften the edge I had cultivated through near-death and rebirth. It was during one of these strategy sessions, papers strewn across the conference room, legal filings stacked like barricades, that Darius first reached out. His email was polite, disarming, calculated, the kind of message designed to entice and confuse. Maeve, you're working hard, but are you truly using your talents where they matter? Come back. Together, we can control everything, rather than fighting a losing battle against the tides.
D.
I read the message once, then again. His words were elegant, familiar, but empty of sincerity. I imagined his smile, the subtle manipulation, the way he had always tried to make me doubt myself. My pulse quickened, not with desire, but with controlled fury. The ocean of my first life, which had almost drowned me, now became a mirror of my resolve. I typed my response carefully, each word measured. No emotion, no invitation. Only the truth he would never expect. My place is not with you, Darius. My place is with those who value principle over profit and vision over vanity. Your world is crumbling, and I will watch it unfold with precision.
Maeve.
Callan, standing quietly nearby, read the email over my shoulder. He didn't comment, but his hand brushed mine in a subtle gesture of reassurance. I felt the strength in that contact, an unspoken promise that I was not alone in this fight. Over the following weeks, our collaboration intensified. Callan and I coordinated legal challenges, environmental assessments, and public campaigns with meticulous care. Each move was calculated to protect the coast and destabilize Darius's future ventures, but I also noticed something deeper emerging between us. Our professional rapport was evolving into something warmer, more intimate, though never rushed or forced. One evening, after a long day on a threatened shoreline, we walked along the rocks beneath a fiery sunset. I spoke of the near drowning, the betrayal, but framed it as a story of caution, intuition, and hard-won wisdom. Callan listened, unwavering, never flinching, never pitying me. His presence was a steadying anchor to the tumultuous waves of memory that crashed within me. "He tried to drown your voice, Maeve," he said softly, voice carrying over the water. "But I will help you make sure it's the only voice people hear when it matters. You don't have to carry this alone." I let his words sink in. In my first life, I had been isolated, reliant on my own brilliance, but vulnerable to betrayal. Now, with Callan, I realized that strength didn't mean solitude. It meant having someone equally committed to truth and principle by your side. I could fight fiercely, calculate ruthlessly, and still allow space for trust and care. That night, I returned to my office overlooking the harbor, maps and documents still spread across the desk. I studied the data again, reviewing Darius's predictable patterns and the subtle openings I could exploit. Each move he would make in the future was now visible to me, like charted currents beneath a turbulent sea. But I also studied Callan's counsel, integrating his insights into my strategy. Together, we were no longer reactive. We were proactive, creating a framework that would protect the coast and dismantle corruption simultaneously. As darkness fell, I reflected on how much I had grown. The near-death, the betrayal, the ocean, all of it had shaped me, forged a resilience and clarity I had never possessed before. And yet, there was a softness now too, a willingness to allow trust and connection where before there had been only suspicion and isolation. Callan was the shore to my storm, steadying, principled, unwavering. I whispered a quiet promise into the night. I will protect what matters. I will reclaim my life. And when Darius realizes the cost of underestimating me, it will be too late. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt at peace. Not because the threat was gone, but because I had built a map, a cartography of my heart, my mind, and my world, where integrity, intelligence, and love guided every move. I was Maeve, not just survivor, but architect of my own future, anchored firmly by principle, and accompanied by someone I could trust completely. The air in the small office smelled of salt, paper, and ink, a comforting combination that reminded me of why I had chosen this life. Maeve, the marine cartographer, had become Maeve, the strategist and guardian of the coast. But this chapter of my life was not merely about conservation. It was about justice, about dismantling the man who had once tried to erase me entirely, Darius Valencia. Callan sat across the table, his brow furrowed as he examined a series of spreadsheets and environmental reports I had meticulously compiled. "Every financial route he'll take," he said, tracing a line with his pen, "he's vulnerable here. And here. And most importantly, here." I nodded, leaning over the desk. "Exactly. Every acquisition he will attempt, every investment he will misrepresent, I already know how it will unfold. We just have to set the dominoes in motion carefully. No shortcuts. No mistakes. Precision wins this war." Darius, in my first life, had been arrogant, overconfident, and reckless. I had cataloged every flaw, every habit, every underestimation he made of me. Now, with the advantage of foresight, I could transform those weaknesses into a public, undeniable exposure that would ruin him entirely. Our strategy was threefold. First, gather irrefutable evidence of financial misconduct and environmental negligence in Darius's early projects. I dug into records, leveraging my knowledge of future audits, regulatory inspections, and failed ventures. Every discrepancy was a thread we could pull, unraveling the web of his supposed brilliance. Second, coordinate a legal and public exposure campaign. Callan's firm had the credibility and legal weight to act effectively, while my organization, Tides and Truth, provided irrefutable data and strategic positioning. We would expose Darius not only as incompetent, but as morally corrupt, a man whose gains were built on the destruction of communities, coastlines, and the trust of those around him. Third, neutralize his allies and financial backers. I had already identified the small networks he would rely on, from investors to advisors, who trusted him blindly. Each one would receive carefully timed, factual, and devastating information that would force them to reconsider their support. The goal was not only Darius's ruin, but his isolation. By the time the world knew, he would have no safety net. We began with his first real acquisition, a coastal development project disguised as a profitable venture. The moment we discovered his plan, Callan and I coordinated. I presented a report detailing the environmental consequences, financial inconsistencies, and legal loopholes Darius had intended to exploit. Callan's team filed the formal objections and initiated a public review process. The pressure was immediate. Darius attempted to charm local authorities, to intimidate regulators, to manipulate the narrative with carefully curated appearances. But every move he made, I had anticipated. Each attempt to sidestep scrutiny was blocked, countered, and made public. The careful exposure of small inconsistencies escalated into a full investigation, drawing attention from journalists, regulators, and investors alike. At home, late into the night, I reviewed the next stage of the plan. I traced Darius's patterns like lines on a map, predicting the sequence of moves he would make to regain control. Then I positioned Callan, our allies, and the media to intercept each one. I felt the thrill of control, tempered by the awareness that even with foresight, vigilance was required. This was not a game. It was a calculated war, and any misstep could compromise everything. Callan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Maeve, I have to admit, even I didn't expect such precision. You anticipate not just his moves, but his thinking. It's formidable. I allowed a small, tight smile. It has to be. He nearly killed me once. I can't let him underestimate me again. And this time, I'm not alone. You're my anchor, Callan. Your principles guide me where foresight alone isn't enough. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Each step we took tightened the web around Darius. Investors began questioning his credibility. Regulators demanded audits he could not fake. Community activists, armed with our data, protested his projects. I watched the ripple effect spread across the networks he had relied on for decades. One evening, a particularly tense moment arrived. Darius had launched a public relations campaign, positioning himself as the visionary philanthropist everyone believed him to be. I watched the broadcast quietly, analyzing every gesture, every word. Then, with careful timing, I released a counter-report highlighting the same venture's ecological and financial risks, along with evidence of previous failures that he had attempted to conceal. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. Social media erupted. Investors withdrew support. Regulators demanded explanations. Darius, the man who had once made me think I was powerless, now found himself cornered, exposed, and isolated. Callan placed a hand on my shoulder. It's working. Every domino is falling exactly as you predicted. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the sensation of victory mix with relief and exhaustion. Yes, but it's not just about winning. It's about justice, about showing the world that brilliance without integrity is hollow. Darius underestimated what happens when the betrayed are prepared, strategic, and principled. By the end of the quarter, Darius's empire was in shambles. Legal actions, financial exposure, and public scrutiny left him bankrupt, discredited, and utterly alone. The man who had once controlled me through charm, deceit, and fear now had nothing. Not wealth, not influence, not allies. I sat back in my office, surveying the maps, reports, and correspondence that had orchestrated this downfall. It wasn't gloating. It was clarity, precision, and fulfillment, the culmination of years of foresight, strategy, and ethical determination. Callan stood beside me silently, his steady presence a reminder that this victory was not mine alone. "We did this," he said quietly. "No," I corrected, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. "We guided it. Justice was always going to happen. We just made sure it happened properly." For the first time since the betrayal, I allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of total control, not over Darius, but over my own destiny. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water, I realized that the future I had fought so fiercely for was finally within reach. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and pine from the coastline that had once been at the center of our battles. Standing on the deck of our small, ethically designed research vessel, I felt the full weight of what had been achieved. Tides and truth had grown into a national force, and Callan, once my adversary in principle, stood beside me, the embodiment of the stability and trust one had learned to accept. We watched the waves stretch endlessly toward the horizon, each ripple a reflection of the victories and losses that had brought us here. Darius Valencia's downfall had been swift, sealed by our precise, ethical execution. The satisfaction was profound, stemming not from gloating, but from the integrity of the process. I had not merely defeated him. I had constructed a world where my own voice could never be silenced again. Callan's hand brushed against mine, a silent question, a quiet acknowledgement of our shared triumph. This time, the brush lingered, the heat from his skin a steady pulse against my palm. I turned to him, meeting his gaze. "It feels surreal," I admitted. "All the planning, the risks, the moments I thought I might fail, and now here we are." He smiled, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and a gentle warmth that seemed to melt the remaining ice around my heart. He reached out and let his fingers lightly tuck a wind-tossed strand of hair behind my ear, the fleeting, intimate contact sending a necessary shiver down my spine. "We didn't just win, Maeve. We built something lasting. You taught me to trust in the data, in strategy, and in vision. I taught you that integrity isn't just a concept, it's a practice." I squeezed his hand, finally intertwining my fingers with his, feeling the solidity and strength of his grip, the hand that drew up legal documents and charted ethical courses. "It's strange, isn't it?" I murmured. "How the person you once saw as an enemy can become your most steadfast partner." Callan's chuckle was low and thoughtful. He moved closer, settling his body naturally against mine, our sides touching, sharing warmth against the sea air. His proximity was a powerful reassurance, a grounding force I no longer questioned. "Strange, yes, but effective. Without your knowledge of his moves, and without the strategy you've built, I could not have matched his influence with principle alone. Together, we're stronger than any one person, Darius included." We spent the morning reviewing the organization's progress, our heads bent close together over the reports, our voices low. The physical contact was constant and easy, a shoulder brushing, a shared leaning over the page. Later, as we walked along the shoreline, Callan paused to pick up a piece of driftwood, examining the intricate lines worn by the waves. "This is what it's about, isn't it?" he said softly. "The patterns, the flow, the structure, you read it, you interpret it, and you guide it. Life, people, even chaos, they have a map. And we've learned how to navigate it." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within me. I thought I could do it alone before. I thought control meant isolation. But now I see the strength in partnership, in trust, in combining insight with principle. The afternoon sun dipped lower, painting the sky with strokes of gold and rose. We returned to the vessel, the familiar hum of equipment and the smell of salt mixing with fresh coffee. Callan set aside the driftwood, turning to me with a quiet intensity that was suddenly overwhelming. "Maeve, what we've built together, it's more than a victory. It's proof," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He reached out, his hands settling gently on my waist, pulling me close. "Proof that intelligence paired with integrity can change the world. And proof that the people who underestimate you are the first to fall." I inhaled sharply, my hands coming to rest naturally against his chest. The air seemed to still around us, the only movement the slow, rising tide of attraction between us. I am no longer bound by fear, by betrayal, by the mistakes of my past, I stated, my voice strong despite the closeness. I am Maeve, strategist, guardian, and now, finally, partner. Not just in work, but in life. Callan stepped closer, his presence commanding, yet tender. And I will be that partner. Always. Not to control you, not to guide you in place of your judgment, but to walk beside you, to anchor the path you've charted, and to share in the victories we earn together. The sea whispered beneath our vessel. Callan's eyes searched mine, asking and receiving permission in the space of a heartbeat. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fading light, he lowered his head and kissed me, a kiss that was rigorous in its commitment, yet profoundly gentle in its delivery, sealing the victory with a shared future. I closed my eyes, inhaling the crisp sea air, and allowed myself a rare moment of peace. For the first time, I was not running, not anticipating, not defending. I was home, anchored by truth, guided by principle, and held securely by the hands of the man who had proven that partnership could be as powerful as brilliance. This is an incredibly rich and evocative scene. I will now infuse it with explicit physical contact, sensual details, and a heightened sense of intimacy, focusing on the emotional resonance of their physical connection to make their bond unmistakably romantic, not just platonic. Rose the cartography of courage, the tides of our future, intimate expansion. The early morning sun shimmered across the calm waters of the bay, turning each wave into a ribbon of gold and silver. Standing on the deck of our fully restored research vessel, I watched the horizon stretch endlessly, a living map of both challenge and possibility. Maeve, the woman who had faced betrayal, near death, and ruthless ambition, had finally arrived at a place of clarity, power, and profound partnership. Tides and truth had grown far beyond what I had imagined. What began as a small, scrappy organization now influenced national policy, educated communities, and set the gold standard for ethical environmental oversight. Callan had been integral to every achievement, not merely as a strategist or a legal expert, but as a steady, grounding force who understood the importance of patience, principle, and the very real, undeniable pull that drew us together. Are you ever going to stop staring at the horizon? Callan asked with a teasing grin, appearing beside me. His presence was as reassuring as the steady rhythm of the sea, and my skin immediately warmed to his proximity. I smiled softly, feeling the warmth of his hand, not just brushing, but deliberately finding and settling over mine, fingers gently interlacing. His touch was a comforting weight, a current of calm. Not today. Not ever, I think. There's a beauty in the unknown, and the future is still full of tides to navigate. He nodded, eyes scanning the waters with a mixture of admiration and quiet pride. His gaze lingered on my face for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had shared, before returning to the sea. And yet we've charted more than anyone could have imagined. Every project, every victory, it's proof that integrity, intelligence, and perseverance can reshape a world built on shortcuts and greed. I let the memory of Darius Valencia pass briefly. His schemes had unraveled, his allies abandoned him. I felt no joy in his ruin, only the serene satisfaction of justice executed with precision. Callan's hand, still holding mine, lifted slightly to rest on my shoulder. His thumb brushed the exposed skin of my neck, a tender, possessive gesture that sent a soft shiver through me. He leaned closer, his scent, sea air, salt, and something uniquely his filling my senses. You've done more than survive, Maeve. You've thrived. You've built a legacy. And now you're teaching others that brilliance is meaningless without integrity, and that courage is measured by the principles you uphold, not the battles you win. I exhaled slowly, absorbing the truth of his words. Our partnership was not just strategic, it was personal, rooted in respect, trust, and a deep, burgeoning love that flowed beneath the surface of our professional lives. A group of young researchers waved from the dock below. Their enthusiasm reminded me why I had fought so fiercely. The work was never just about revenge. It had always been about stewardship, responsibility, and the chance to create a world where ethical ambition could flourish. I turned to Callan, letting go of one hand to cup his cheek, feeling the slight stubble beneath my palm. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't returned?" I asked softly, the weight of my past life lingering in the curve of the question. He looked at me with quiet certainty, his eyes searching mine, full of an affection that was almost palpable. He covered my hand on his cheek with his own, pressing it gently. "I think about it, yes. But I also know that everything we built depends on this life, this moment. You returned, yes, but you also chose differently. You chose principle. You chose partnership. And together, we chose the future over the past." The sun climbed higher, illuminating the gentle waves and the promise of the day. I felt a deep, serene satisfaction. I was no longer a victim, no longer bound by fear or resentment. Callan leaned close, his voice low and intimate, his gaze dropping to my lips. "Maeve, whatever comes next, we face it together. Not as adversaries or survivors, but as partners, architects of our own future." I rested my forehead against his, letting the warmth of his presence anchor me. His breath mingled with mine, a soft, shared rhythm that spoke volumes. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion.
"Together."
And this time, the course is ours to navigate. As the vessel gently rocked, the water sparkling with early light, I realized that the story of Maeve, once marked by near death and deception, was now one of resilience, justice, and love. The ocean, which had nearly claimed me, had become a testament to my strength. The tides I once feared now carried promise, stability, and legacy. I opened my eyes, feeling the wind on my face and the certainty in my chest. Callan's arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me into a firm embrace that left no doubt about the depth of our connection. I was Maeve, strategist, guardian, and partner, a captain of both my vessel and my life, anchored firmly by truth, guided by principle, and held securely by someone whose unwavering respect and integrity mirrored my own. Together, we had not only survived the storm, we had reshaped the world in its wake. The horizon beckoned, and for the first time, I stepped forward without fear, knowing that the legacy we were building would endure, long after the waves had settled and the tides had carried our story beyond the reach of betrayal.